In this Python tutorial, you're going to learn everything you need to know to start programming in Python. If you want to learn Python programming for data science, machine learning, or web development, this Python tutorial is the perfect place to learn Python. You don't need any prior knowledge in Python or programming in general. I'm going to teach you everything from scratch. I'm Mosh Hamadani, and I've taught millions of people how to code through this channel. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe as I upload new videos every week. Now, let's jump in and get started. All right, before we get started, let me give you some ideas about what you can do with Python. That's a very common question. Python is a multi-purpose programming language, so you can use it for a variety of different tasks. You can use Python for machine learning and AI. In fact, Python is the #1 language for machine learning and data science projects. Python is also very popular in web development. Using Python and a framework called Django, you can build amazing websites. Here are 5 websites powered with Python and Django: YouTube, Instagram, Spotify, Dropbox, and Pinterest. You can also use Python in automation. With Python, you can save your time and increase your productivity by automating repetitive tasks. So why are you learning Python? Are you learning it for automation, for data science, or web development? Let me know in the comment section below. All right, the first thing I want you to do is to head over to python.org to download the latest version of Python. So you go to Downloads and select the latest version of Python. Here in your Downloads folder, you should see this package. Simply double-click it. You're going to see this Python installer. If you're on Windows, you will see this checkbox over here, Add Python to Path. Make sure to check it. It's really important. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to follow this tutorial. Simply click on Continue. Again, one more time. Agree with the terms and install the latest version of Python. Now here you need to enter the username password of your computer. So let's do that real quick. Next, you need to install a code editor. We use a code editor to write our code and execute it. The most popular code editor for Python is PyCharm. You can get it from jetbrains.com/PyCharm. So on this page, click on Download. You should see 2 different editions. One is the Professional Edition, which is commercial. And we also have this Community Edition, which is free and open source. So we're going to download the Community Edition. Now in your Downloads folder, you should have this package. Let's double-click it. If you're on Windows, you're going to see an installation wizard. So simply click on the next button until you install PyCharm. If you're on a Mac, you need to drag this PyCharm and drop it onto the Applications folder. Now, let's open it. The first time you open PyCharm, you have to configure a few settings. We don't want to spend time on this. So over here, you're going to click on Skip Remaining and Set Defaults. Now let's create a new project. Over here, we can specify the location and the name of our Python project. So let's append Hello World to this path. This is where our Python project is going to be saved. So let's click on Create. In this window, you can see the content of our project. So here's our Hello World project. Currently, we have only one folder inside this project, that is VN, which is short for virtual environment. We'll talk about virtual environments in the future. So currently, we don't have any Python files inside this project. A real application can consist of tens or hundreds or even thousands of Python files. So let's right-click on the project name and go to New Python File. We're going to call this file App. Now we can collapse this project window by clicking on this icon. So now we have more space. Let's write our first Python code. We're going to write print all in lowercase, then add parentheses, then add quotes, either single quotes or double quotes. And inside these quotes, we're going to write Hello World. So this is what we call a string. A string means a string or sequence of characters. In simple words, that means textual data. So in Python and in many other programming languages, whenever we're dealing with textual data, we should always surround our text with quotes. In Python, we can use single or double quotes. Now, this print you see here is a function built into Python, and we can use it to print a message on our application window. So let me show you how to run this code. On the top, we go to the Run menu and then select Run. Note that there is a shortcut associated with this command. I always use shortcuts because they increase my productivity. So let's click on this. Now select app, and over here, you can see this little window. This is what we call the terminal window, and it shows the output of our program. So here's the hello world message printed in the terminal window. Now, as you learn more Python, you will learn how to build applications that have a graphical user interface. That's an advanced topic, so for now, let's not worry about it. All right, now let's talk about variables. We use variables to temporarily store data in a computer's memory. For example, we can store the price of a product or someone's name, their email, their age, and so on. Let me show you. So to declare a variable, we start by typing a name for that variable. Let's say age. Then we add an equal sign, and then we type a value. Let's say 20. So with this, we're storing the number 20 somewhere in our computer's memory, and we're attaching this age as a label for that memory location. So now we can read the value at this memory location and print it on the terminal. So instead of printing hello world, we want to print the value of the age variable. So I'm going to delete what we have inside parentheses and type age. Note that I'm not adding quotes because if I run this program, we'll see the text age on the terminal. We don't want that. We want the value of the age variable. So let's remove the quotes and print the value of the age variable. Now here on the toolbar, you can click on this play icon to run your program, or you can use the shortcut that I showed you in the last video. So the shortcut is over here. On a Mac, that's Control, Shift, and R. So there you go. Now you can see the value of the age variable. Now we can also change the value of a variable. For example, on line 2, we can set age to 30. Now, when we run our program, we see 30. So as you can see, our program gets executed from top to bottom. So this is how we can declare and use a variable. Now let's look at a few more examples. So I'm going to declare another variable called price and set it to 19.95. So in Python, we can use numbers with a decimal point or whole numbers. We can also declare a variable and assign it a string value. So let's say first underline name. So if you want to use multiple words in the name of a variable, we should separate them using an underscore. This makes our code more readable. See what would happen if I didn't use this underline. This is not easily readable. So we always separate multiple words by an underscore. Now we set this to a string. So we can use single quotes or double quotes. Let's say Mosh. We also have a special type of value called a Boolean value, which can be true or false. That is like yes or no in English. Let me show you. So I'm going to declare another variable called isOnline and set it to true. We could also set it to false. What we have here is called a Boolean value. Now note that Python is a case-sensitive language, so it's sensitive to lowercase and uppercase letters. In this case, if I use a lowercase f, you can see an error over here because this is not recognized in Python. So false with a capital F is a special keyword in Python that represents the Boolean false value. So this is how we can declare and use variables in Python. All right, now here's a little exercise for you. Imagine we want to write a program for a hospital. So we're going to check in a patient named John Smith. He's 20 years old and is a new patient. I want you to declare a few variables to store these values. Use the comment box below to share your code with others. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to receive input from the user. So in Python, we have another built-in function called input. We use this to read a value from the terminal window. Let me show you. So we add parentheses, then we type a string. Here we can type a message like, what is your name? We add a question mark followed by a space. You will see why we need this space in a second. So let's run this program. We get this message. Now we have to enter a value. So we click over here. Now you can see that the caret is separated from the question mark. This is because of the white space that we added over here. So now we have to type a value, let's say John. When we press enter, this function will return the value that we entered in the terminal window. So we can get that value and store it in a variable. So let's declare a variable called name and set it to the return value of the input function. Now we can print a greeting message for this user. So we use the print function. We say, hello, we add a space. Now, after the string, we want to add the value of the name variable. So we use a plus sign and then type name. What we are doing here is called string concatenation. So we're combining this string with another string. Now let's run our program and see what happens. So what is your name? Mosh. Now we get this message, hello Mosh. So this is how we can use the input function in Python. You have learned about the three types of data in Python. We have numbers, strings, and booleans. Now there are times you want to convert the value of a variable from one type to another. Let me show you. So we're going to use our input function to read the user's birth year. So enter your birth year. Now this input function is going to return a value, so we can store it in a variable called birth underline year. Okay? Now let's write code to calculate the age of this user. So we write an expression like this. Currently we are in the year 2020. So 2020 minus birth year. This expression or piece of code is going to produce a value. So once again, we can store that value in a variable. Let's call that variable age. Now let's print age on the terminal. Let's run our program and see what happens. So my birth year is 1982. Enter. Oops, our program crashed. So whenever you see this red message, that indicates an error. So this error occurred in this file, that is our app.py, on line 2. Right below that, you can see the piece of code that generated this error. So that is this expression, 2020 minus birth year. Now below that, you can see the type of error. So here we have unsupported types for subtraction. We have int and stir. What are these? Well, this int is short for integer, and that represents a whole number in programming. So 2020 is an example of an integer. Now birth year is an example of a string, because whenever we call the input function, this function will return a value as a string, even if we enter a number. In other words, when I entered 1982, this input function returned a string with these characters, 1982. So this string is different from the number 1982. They're completely different types. So in this case, let me delete these lines. The reason we got this error is that we tried to subtract a string from an integer. So our code looked like this, 1982. Now Python doesn't know how to subtract a string from an integer. So to solve this problem, we need to convert this string to an integer. Now in Python, we have a bunch of built-in functions for converting the types of our variables. So we have this int function. We can pass our birth year to it, and this will return the numeric representation of the birth year. So to solve this problem, we need to replace the string with the int function. So let's see what's going on here. On the first line, we call the input function. This returns a string. On the second line, we pass this string to our int function. The int function will return the numeric representation of the birth year. Then we subtract it from 2020. We get the age and store it in the age variable. Now let's run our program. So 1982, and there you go. I'm 38 years old. So this is how the int function works. Now we also have another built-in function called float. That is for converting a value to a floating point number. A floating point number in Python and other programming languages is a number with a decimal point. So 10 is an integer and 10.1 is a float. So we have int, we have float, and we also have bool for converting a value to a boolean. And finally, we have stir for converting a value to a string. So these are the built-in functions for converting the type of our variables. Now here's a little exercise for you. I want you to write a basic calculator program. So here we have to enter two numbers. We can type a whole number or a number with a decimal point. And then our program will print the sum of these two numbers. So pause the video, spend 2 minutes on this exercise, and then see my solution. All right, first we're going to call our input function to read the first number. We get the result and store it in a variable called first. Now, let's declare another variable called second and read the second number. Now, we calculate the sum, so that is first plus second. Now let's see what happens when we print sum on the terminal. So I enter 10 and 20, but instead of 30, we get 1020. This is because we're combining or concatenating two strings. So, as I told you before, the input function returns a string. So this line will be equivalent to first equals 10. We're dealing with a string, not an integer. Similarly, second is going to be 20 as a string. So when we combine two strings, 10 plus 20, we'll get 1020 because we're dealing with textual data, okay? So to solve this problem, we need to convert the values we read to their numeric representation. So over here, we're going to pass first to our int function, and here as well. Now let's run our program. So we enter 10 and 20, we get 30. What if we enter a floating point number? So 10.1 and 20. We got an error. So to solve this problem, we need to treat both these values as floats. So instead of the int function, we're going to use the float function. Now, let's run our program one more time. We enter a whole number and a floating point number. So the result is correct. Now, let's add a label over here. So sum is plus sum. Let's run our program one more time. 10 and 20. Once again, we got an error. The error is saying that Python can only concatenate strings, not floats to strings. So on line 4, we have a string. We're concatenating this with a float because the result of this expression is a floating point number. We're adding two floats, so the result is a float as well. So Python doesn't know how to evaluate code like this. It doesn't know how to concatenate a float to a string. To solve this problem, we need to convert sum to a string. So this is where we use the stir function. Now, let's run the program again. So 10 plus 20.1, and here's the result. And one last thing. In this example, I'm calling the float function. At the time, we want to calculate the sum of these two numbers, but this is not a requirement. We can call the float function over here. So this input function returns a string. We can pass that string to our float function. Take a look. So float, parentheses, like this. So the value that we're passing to the float function is the value that is returned from the input function. Similarly, we call the float function over here. Now, we can change this expression to first plus second. That is another way to write this piece of code. So type conversion is important in Python and other programming languages. There are times you need to convert the type of a variable to a different type. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you a bunch of cool things you can do with strings in Python. So let's start by declaring a variable called course and set it to Python for beginners. Now this string that we have over here is technically an object. And an object in Python is like an object in the real world. As a metaphor, think of the remote control of your TV. This remote control is an object and it has a bunch of capabilities. It has a bunch of buttons for turning your TV on, turning it off, changing the volume, and so on. Now in this program, this course variable is storing a string object. This string object has a bunch of capabilities. So if you type course dot, you can see all the capabilities available in a string object. These are basically functions that you can call, just like the print or input functions. The difference is that the print and input functions are general purpose functions. They don't belong to a particular object, but the functions you see over here are specific to strings. Now, more accurately, we refer to these as methods. So when a function is part of an object, we refer to that function as a method. So let's look at a few examples. Here we have a function or a method called upper, and we use that to convert a string to uppercase. So if we print course.upper and run this program, you can see our course in uppercase. Pretty useful. Now, what you need to understand here is that this upper method does not change our original string. It will return a new string. So right after this, if we print course, you can see that our course variable is not affected. So the upper method returns a new string. Now, similarly, we have another method called lower for converting a string to lowercase. We have a method called find to see if our string contains a character or a sequence of characters. For example, here we can pass y, and this will return the index of the first occurrence of y in our string. So in Python, the index of the first character in a string is 0. So here we have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. So when we run this program, you're going to see 1 on the terminal because the index of y is 1. Take a look. First, I'm going to delete this line. We don't need it anymore. Also, let's delete this line. Let's run the program. There you go. Now, as I told you before, Python is sensitive to lowercase and uppercase letters. So if I pass an uppercase y here, this find method returns -1 because we don't have an uppercase y in this string. We can also pass a sequence of characters, for example, 4. So this will return the index of the word 4. Take a look. So it's 7. Now, there are times we want to replace something in a string with something else. To do that, we use the replace method, replace. So we can replace 4 with a string containing the number 4. Take a look. So Python for beginners. Obviously, if we look for a character or a sequence of characters that don't exist in our string, nothing is going to happen. For example, if we try to replace x with 4, obviously we don't have x here, so nothing is going to happen. Also, just like the upper method, the replace method is not going to modify our original string, so it's going to return a new string. This is because strings in Python and many other programming languages are immutable. We cannot change them once we create them. Whenever we want to change a string, we'll end up with a new string object in memory. Now, one last thing I want to cover in this tutorial. There are times you want to see if your string contains a character or a sequence of characters. One way to do that is using the find method that we talked about. So let's see if our string contains Python. Now, when we run this program, that is the index of the first occurrence of the word Python in our string. Now, in Python, we can also use the in operator. So we can write an expression like this. We type a string, Python, then we type in. This is a special keyword in Python. This is what we call the in operator. So after that, we type the name of our variable. So with this expression, we're checking to see if we have Python in course. As you can see, Python code is very readable. It's like plain English. So when we run this program, instead of seeing the index of the first occurrence of Python, we see a Boolean value. This is more desirable in a lot of cases. Next, we're going to look at arithmetic operations. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you the arithmetic operators that we have in Python. These are the same arithmetic operators that we have in math. For example, we can add numbers, we can subtract them, multiply them, and so on. So let's print 10 plus 3. When we run this program, we get 13. So this is the addition operator. We also have subtraction, we have multiplication, and division. Now, technically, we have two different types of division operators. We have a division with 1 slash and another with 2 slashes. Let's look at the differences. If we use a single slash, we get a floating point number that is a number with a decimal point. But if we use double slashes, we get an integer, a whole number. We also have the modulus operator that is indicated by a percent sign, and this returns the remainder of the division of 10 by 3. So that is 1. And finally, we have the exponent operator that is indicated by 2 asterisks. So this is 10 to the power of 3. So when we run this, we get 1,000. Now, for all these operators that you saw, we have an augmented assignment operator.
Let me explain what it means. So